Hello, grade 12s. Welcome back from the ad break. Just before the break, we were looking at, or I was going to introduce features underpinning forecasting with regard to business cycles. And I said earlier on, people will always have different perspectives in terms of what would happen to the economy if a particular decision has been made. It could be an economic decision around monetary or fiscal policies, or it could be a political decision that could have a positive or a negative effect on the economy. So let's have a look at some of the economic indicators that could assist us when it comes to forecasting business cycles. So now we know that we're looking at features underpinning forecasting, which is another interesting concept in the world of economics. We're still looking at business cycles, the fluctuations that happen in the economy. We know that there are times where we enjoy some prosperity when our economy is doing really well, and then we know that there are times when we are faced with economic difficulty as well. So there are many economic indicators. So we come across another concept over there. So there are many economic indicators that can be used to forecast business cycles. Some of these are. So we're going to start with the leading indicators, because these could also be used to forecast business cycles. So leading indicators give consumers, businesses, and the state a glimpse of the direction in which the economy might be heading. I think it's important that we get this and get a sense of where our economy is going. So in order to have that information, we can then use the leading indicators to get a sense of where the economy, what direction our economy is taking. You know, are we going the route of facing a downfall, or are we going to pick up and enjoy economic prosperity? So the leading indicators play a very important role in giving us some direction or some light in terms of where our economy is headed. So I think it's important for consumers so that they know and they can plan accordingly, but also for businesses and the state so that they can put certain measures in place in order to ensure that they respond to whatever challenges that could be brought about by the changes in the economy. So when these indicators rise, so when they rise, the level of economic activities will also rise a few months later. So when the indicators show a rise, then we know that in a few months, the economic activities will also rise. Examples of leading indicators are job advertising space, inventory, and sales. Okay, so let's just unpack this a bit further. So we know that when we see more job advertisements being put out, we know that companies are willing to employ people, so there are employment opportunities that are made available to the households for them to sell their factor inputs. In this instance, that will be labor, and then also looking at inventory as well and sales. So when you see that the sales are going up, or there's been a huge demand for a particular product, we know that will lead to some economic growth because sales will increase. But also with more people being employed because of the job advertisement that have been put out in the job advertisement space, that will mean that there'll be more people employed, and those people will have the financial resources to enable them to spend or to participate in economic activity. So these are some of the indicators that we can use in order to determine the direction that our economy will most likely take in the next few months. So it's important that if you're studying economics, you get familiar with these indicators, because it's important for us to be able to give some perspective in terms of what we think will happen in the economy and also in economic activities. Then we've got the lagging indicators, which won't change direction until after the business cycle has changed its direction. So these will not change direction until business cycles have changed their direction. For example, indicators are hours worked in construction and the total of commercial vehicles sold. Okay, so these won't change direction until the business cycle changes direction. Okay, so that's we call them the lagging indicators. So they don't change until there's been an actual change in the business cycle itself. So we're looking at hours worked in construction and also a total in the commercial vehicles which have been sold. And then moving on to a composite or composite indicators, it is a grouping of various indicators of the same type into single value. So let's just get an example of what do we mean by this. Okay, there we are. So the single figure forms the norm of a country's economic performance. So, you know, earlier on we looked at the lagging indicators and the leading indicators as well. The terminology itself, leading, these indicators come first, and therefore then after them we will have a sense of the direction that the economy will take. But if you're looking at the lagging, if you're lagging behind, it means that you are trailing behind. So these indicators will not change until the cycles have changed or until the business cycle itself has changed. And here we've got a composite, which is a combination of various indicators of the same type being put together into a single value, and then the single figure forms the norm for a country's economic performance. All right, and then moving on to a trend, because, you know, in the news you often hear about the trend, that the trend has been that the rand will rise or the rand will drop when a certain decision has been made. So it is important to understand what the trends are, because the trends are also going to help us to make sound economic decisions, because that pattern has happened before and it had various consequences that it had brought with the changes that came about because of that particular change. So what is a trend? So the trend is the general direction of the economy. Okay, so we've been seeing, or we've been hearing in the news that, you know, the rand had dropped its value because of this decision and that decision. That is just the general direction that the economy will change if a sound economic decision is not being made. So it's important that we understand what a trend is. Then the trend line that rises gradually will be positively sloped in the long run. This rising line indicates a growing economy. Okay, so it's important, well, it's good when we see a trend that is positively sloped in the long run, because we know that this indicates that our economy is growing, because we are all for economic growth. But it's important that we understand the trends in the market, and certain things that have happened before, or they've happened a few times in the past and had, you know, a sort of like a specific outcome that could be expected based on the decision that has been made in terms of economics and policy related matters. And then also our next point is the length that is used to measure the peak to peak and also the trough to trough. When we looked at business cycles, we said a peak will be the highest point in the upswing, and then a trough will be the lowest point in the downswing. So the length itself that's used to measure that period from a peak to another peak, or from a trough to another trough, could actually be used to get some information in regards to economic activity. So in terms of length, so length is measured from peak to peak or from trough to trough. So this is based on the diagram that we studied, or that we looked at when we did or when we first introduced the business cycles. So longer cycles show strength and shorter cycles show weaknesses, okay, with regard to economic activities, okay. So if from peak to peak we've had a very long cycle, that shows the strength of the economy at that particular point or at that particular period. And if we had a very short cycle from peak to peak, so we can't say that that was really a strong cycle because of its length. So it will be considered more of a weak cycle if it had a shorter length in that regard. And same thing, you know, if we talk of a strong trough, it means that it was quite a long cycle from trough to trough. So the longness shows the strength in how weak our economy was or was performing at that particular point in time. And then obviously if it was just a shorter phase, then we can say, you know, it was expected that we will go through some economic difficulty, but it wasn't something major because the length wasn't that long in terms of business cycles and economic activities. So just be aware of that when you are going over your cycles. And then the next point that we're going to look at is the amplitude. Amplitude refers to the vertical, which is the height, difference between a trough. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to where I was. There we are. Great stuff. Okay, so amplitude refers to a vertical, which is the height, difference between a trough and the next peak of a cycle. Okay, so remember when we looked at our business cycles, you know, we said it goes up and it goes down. Okay, so our peak will be over here, so that will be a peak over there, and then our trough will be right there, the bottom part over there, so we know that that would be our trough. Okay, all right, so when we look at amplitude, so we're referring to the difference between a trough and the next peak. Okay, so there we are. So for us to reach our next peak, so we will have this distance so that we can be back there again. So the larger the amplitude, the more extreme changes that occur. Okay, so if we've got a larger amplitude, then we know that there will be extreme changes that will occur in that particular cycle because of how large the amplitude is. Okay, so just know the terminology and also just be able to give an example in your responses as well. Okay, and then we move on to our next point, our extrapolation. Extrapolation means to estimate something unknown from the facts that are known. For example, extrapolations from known facts are used to predict future share prices. Okay, so here you are predicting or you're estimating something unknown, but you're using the facts that are known. For example, if we're looking or wanting to predict what the future share price would be, we will use the known. Okay, so the information or the facts that we know that will be based on how the markets have been performing, if there have been any major economic policies or changes that have been made by the monetary policies, if there was a decision from the Reserve Bank or any announcement that had come from the Minister of Finance. So that information, because it is tangible, valid, and accessible in some regard or in some extent, then we know that we can rely on that information to make certain predictions. And we know that people that trade in the stock exchange, it's all about predicting on how the share price will perform based on certain factors or facts that are known that could influence the share price or the performance of that particular share. So we will use the extrapolation for that task if we are wanting to look at known facts and using the known facts in order to predict the future share prices. And then we've got the moving averages. So the moving averages are used to analyze the changes in a series of data over a certain period of time. Okay, so it's important that we as people that study economics always analyze the information and the data that is made available to us. So how do we do that? So we need to monitor the unprocessed information over a period of time so that we can use that information in order to make sound economic decisions, because you can't make economic decisions if you haven't got a reputable or correct information that can be used in the process of making economic decisions, because that information needs to be valid, authentic, and also be easily accessible and understood in order for us to make decisions that will take the economy forward and that will help to increase economic activity, because this is important, because if we do that, we are making decisions that are sound, that are going to help us grow the economy and also create more employment opportunities in order to have more economic activities happening. Having said all of that, I think that was quite a lot to take in, but these are important indicators that we need to be aware of when we are making sound economic decisions. Well, right now we're going to take a short break and I will catch you right after this. Stay tuned.